Why are you running for office, and what makes you the best candidate?
The reason why I'm running for office is because I could not stand idly by any longer. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I work for the VA, and I've seen the decline in health care and benefits for veterans. I've also seen things such as children being separated from their families, sleeping on the floors, or treating children at the border worse than we are animals of the pound. And it's one of those, I couldn't do it any longer. We needed something done with that. The reason why I'm the best candidate is I know the internal mechanisms of the federal government. I've worked for the federal government for about 14 years. I was active duty, I served honorably. I stay loyal to the Constitution of the people and not to one particular, not to a president, but specifically for the Constitution.
Same question.
As you know, I was the Democratic nominee for this seat in 2018, and I'm running now for the same reasons I ran then. Sarah and I, we have 5 teenagers between us, and I'm convinced that rather than building a stronger, more prosperous, and more unified country, that we're about to hand off a weakened and diminished and divided America to our kids. And I can't stand by and let that happen. Now, I've crisscrossed Central Texas, talked to people in every corner of this district for the last 2.5 years, and despite the good economic numbers, we still have real kitchen table issues with healthcare, with economic security, and with our infrastructure, and especially in our rural counties, that we need to solve. These are issues that solve people's everyday lives, their families, their livelihoods. And Congress has not been up to the task. As a matter of fact, Congress hasn't been up to the task on a lot of these issues for the last 2 decades. Now, I've been an engineer and a project manager for over 35 years. And over the span of that career, I've held leadership positions at organizations like Lucent Technologies and Dell Computers. I've led teams all over the world solving complex problems. And across the span of that career, I've developed a skill set that I think is directly applicable to the role of a representative in Congress. I've developed a skill set that allows me to work with, to leverage, and to manage teams of subject matter experts that are tackling problems that I might personally not have subject matter expertise in, but I have the analytical skills to understand the problems and understand the possible solutions. I have the negotiation skills to build consensus amongst all the stakeholders, and I've got the managerial skills to drive the process to closure and actually finish the job and get something done.
Okay. We'll start with you on this one.
Yes, sir.
As you campaign across this district, it's a far-flung one. What is on people's minds? What worries them? What do they tell you is concerning to them?
Sure. Top 3 issues are healthcare, healthcare, and healthcare. We hear that across. The district is interesting. It's like a little microcosm of the country. We have urban areas here in Travis County, up in McLennan County and Brazos County, and those areas are thriving. But in between, we have a lot of rural counties and a lot of small towns that, when you drive through them or you stop in and you visit, you see boarded up storefronts. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. What was the question? It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
What are people? Yeah.
Healthcare. But one of the concerns that crosses all of those geographical boundaries, crosses political and demographic boundaries, is access to quality, affordable healthcare. Our healthcare system is incredibly complex, and that has resulted in a rural healthcare crisis, specifically in this district, as well as excessive costs and restricted access to healthcare for many of us. The system is very complex. What people want out of it is actually quite simple. They want access to quality care, and they don't want to go broke doing it or using it. That's why I support a public option on Medicare. It'll extend healthcare coverage to every American, the 30+ million that don't have it. And by the way, we in Texas lead the nation in all the wrong categories when it comes to healthcare. Our uninsured rate is twice that of the national average. Our children's uninsured rate is twice that of the national average. And we have a maternal mortality rate that rivals that of third world countries. So a public option on Medicare will again extend coverage to every American if they want it. It won't eliminate private employer-sponsored insurance. If you want to stay on that, you can stay on that. It'll reduce overall costs by providing access to primary care and avoiding expensive emergency room care. You won't wind up in the emergency room with if your kid has an ear infection, it escalates beyond out of control. It'll allow the federal government and Medicare to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies and bring down the cost of prescription drugs, and it'll provide protections against bankruptcy due to healthcare costs.
Same question for you. What are people telling you, concerns them as far as the issue?
Well, unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. You have places such as Mart, that's where I'm from, Texas, here in McLennan County. You have Riesel, Groesbeck, parts of Burleson County who want faster internet. They want to be able to go to school through distance learning. They want to be able to be competitive in the job markets. And as Rick touched on, healthcare is another big thing. And I hear a lot of Medicare for all because we've given the insurance companies the leverage right now to deny people benefits, make them pay more out of pocket, have to prove that it is a necessary treatment rather than a cosmetic treatment. So they want to be able to get seen by a doctor without having to fight the insurance companies. You also have things such as roads. Again, I'm from Mart, and it's Grand Canyon-sized potholes in the roads. They want those fixed. They need them fixed. They want sidewalks down for their children to be able to walk down the street safely to school in the morning. And that's a common issue. So unfortunately, it isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. There's many things out there.
Let me start with you on this one. What do you consider the most important piece of legislation that Congress should pass next year, and why?
The most important piece of legislation that needs to be passed is we need to take care of our veterans. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served 8 years, and I'm an Iraq War veteran. I've seen the decline internally within the VA. What we've done to our veterans, it seemed like once a week, veterans are being maimed or dying at VA healthcare facilities. They're having to fight to see doctors and waiting 30 days to get their meds adjusted. And with the benefits for the disability compensation, they're having to fight the system. And some of these veterans are 80 years old, and they're living on limited income and having to hire lawyers to fight the government. And it's because of the VA Accountability Act. We need to eliminate the VA Accountability Act and pass a Doctors and Directors Act, because the VA Accountability Act was specifically meant for the doctors and directors, and unfortunately it's been pushed to the workers, which they now have to speed through claims. Going into seeing a doctor, they have to speed through that. They get about 15 minutes to see a patient, and then they have to wait, and the patient has to wait 30 days. And so that's one of the biggest things. We made a promise to our veterans that we would take care of them for their service, and we have faltered on that promise. That is the most important thing.
I would, with all due respect to the needs of the veterans, I would think that the overall most important piece of legislation that we should pass, which has already passed the House, is H.R. 1, the We the People Act. It bolsters voting rights and access to voting, eases voting registration and knocks down barriers to voting rights. It provides ethics reform across all three branches of the federal government. And perhaps most importantly in my mind, because I feel this is a root cause of so much of the divisiveness and so much of the dysfunction in our federal government these days, it would require states to use nonpartisan citizen commissions to do their redistricting rather than leaving it in the hands of partisan legislatures. I honestly feel that a root cause of many of our problems is the fact that fewer than 20% of our congressional districts are actually even considered competitive these days. And the people who represent those districts are consequently not answerable to their voters. They're more answerable to their party or the president rather than their voters. 7 states already use nonpartisan commissions to do their redistricting. I think the federal government should impose that requirement on all 50 states.
We'll start with you. Tell us about your position, your platform on immigration and border security.
Sure. I'll start with border security. It is vital to secure our borders and all of our ports of entries so that we know who's coming into the country, what their purpose is in being here, and to be able to interdict illegal activities such as human trafficking and drug trafficking. I believe we could use a mix of technological solutions, human resources solutions, boots on the ground. And a barrier is appropriate in urban areas where there's large population, urban-to-urban contact across the border. I don't believe that a wall is an effective or cost-effective solution across the entire 2,000-mile border. And I'm a little surprised that more Texans aren't up in arms, in all honesty, that the federal government is coming in and taking land away from private citizens here in Texas and dividing communities with a wall that will ultimately be proven to be ineffective. Immigration as a whole, of course, we haven't had immigration reform since Reagan was in the White House. It was back in 1987, and the world has changed pretty dramatically since then. We have to do, we have to move to a more merit-based legal immigration system, a system that meets our security needs as well as our economic needs, as well as reflects our values as a society. We have a very low birth rate at the moment, and we have a growing economy. And we need to be able to attract the kind of, and bring in the kind of a talent that will fulfill the roles, the jobs of the 21st century. I also want to say back on border security that not only do we need to secure the border and all of our ports of entry, but we need to ease the pressure on the southern border by looking at the root causes of why people are trying to migrate. There are three major root causes. The first is people seeking asylum. The second is economic migration, and the third, of course, is illegal activities such as human trafficking and drug trafficking. To ease the first, I think we need to look at the root causes of why people are leaving their home countries. Nobody really wants to leave their home country. Something is forcing them out. And we need to address the root causes of why people are leaving. For economic migration, we need to enforce 100% an E-Verify system on employers here in the United States to assure that they are not hiring people who are not authorized to work in the United States. If people can't get jobs here, they won't cross the border illegally to get a job here. And finally, of course, with the drug trafficking, I don't think we need a continued war on drugs. I think we need a war on addiction. If we can reduce our addiction problem, we reduce the demand for drugs coming across the border. We ease that pressure on the border. We weaken the cartels south of the border and allow our better help our neighbors south of the border to enforce and comply with the rule of law.
Good question.
One of the biggest things is immigration reform. That's one of my platforms. We have less than 500 immigration judges currently, and they're leaving. They're coming in and leaving. It's a revolving door. The reason being is because they are overworked. We need to do, at the very least, is double the amount of immigration judges we have. That way we can start trying to counter the backlog. We can start trying to try to take care of the current applications coming through. We had over 2.2 million online applications in last fiscal year. And this is with less than 500 judges. And again, this is why they're leaving. We need to stop separating families at the border. We used to be a country of, we welcome immigrants. My grandfather was an immigrant, and because of him, I was able to serve my country. I was able to run for office. And it's people like that who we welcomed in, they give birth to great people, who then give birth to even better people, and then so on and so forth. And that's what it is about. That's what America is about. Again, we need to stop separating families at the border. I'm a father of two beautiful children, and I cannot stand to see those kids like that any longer. Another thing, too, is I agree with Mr. Kennedy. We need to invest in 21st century technology. The border wall is not a sufficient answer. That's, first off, stimulating the economy temporarily. What I propose we do is we invest in the 21st century technology, more IT personnel, more federal workers at the border, faster response teams. That way they can stop the drug cartels from coming in. That way we can stop the human traffickers. That way we keep everything on lock. We allow asylum seekers the due process we've always given them, because we, for some reason now, are accepting to keep them at the border, to make sure that they're not coming in, when we've never done that. We need to start taking that seriously again. We need to start going back to being Americans and being a nation of immigrants.
Related questions, your thoughts on the protection for the Dreamers And do you support path to citizenship?
I absolutely support paths to citizenship. Dreamers, I will back Dreamers 110%. I've known Dreamers, I've talked to Dreamers, and their biggest fear right now is the uncertainty. What we have with the Dreamers is exactly what everybody wants. Somebody with a squeaky clean record who's being productive members of society. That's what we want, and that's what we need. So I will back them. I will continue to back them. And I say we need to allow them to stay. Have the current law that we have now. It's put in place because they are, again, being productive members of society. They are they're not coming in and out of a revolving door system in the prisons. They're making something of themselves. And as Americans, that's what we want.
Yeah, as far as the Dreamers are concerned, unfortunately, we don't have a law now. We have an executive order that's protecting the Dreamers, and that's another example of where Congress has failed to address a problem over the last 20 years or so. I would absolutely support a path to citizenship for the Dreamers especially. Most of these kids were either born here or brought here at a young age. They don't know any other culture. They don't know any other country. And just from a purely pragmatic point of view, if a Dreamer is here in Texas and is about to graduate from high school and has been here for 50 or 18, 20 years, we've invested $100,000 plus in their education. They're about to start to return on that investment to our economy, and we need to give them a path to do so. I also support a path to citizenship of some sort for the 10.5 million other undocumented folks who've been here. Who are living with us, more than 2/3 of whom have been with us for more than 10 years. They've been contributing taxpayers to our society. They've kept their nose clean. Their kids play on the same soccer teams our kids play on. And it would both be devastating to families and communities as well as to our economy to actually engage in a mass deportation of these folks, as well as what it would cost to do it. I do believe we absolutely must provide a path to citizenship, at least a way to bring these folks out of the shadows, keep them from being exploited, and welcome them into the communities fully that they've been living in for many of them, again, for more than a decade.
Okay. Tell us about we'll start with you, platform on, gun reform as a means to address gun violence.
So I think the key here is what the second part of your question, which is addressing the gun violence, all right? We need to do something that the Congress actually did for the first time in in over 20 years. In the most recent session, they appropriated some funds to the CDC to do research on gun violence and reducing gun violence. That, for me, is the key to bringing down the numbers, the carnage, the 30,000 plus that we lose every year to gun violence in this country. We have to use fact-based analysis to come up with policies that will solve the problem or reduce the problem of gun violence in the country. We have to also at the same time respect the fact that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to individual citizens to bear arms. So we really need to understand how better to live within the constraints of the Second Amendment and focus on the actual problem at hand. Gun ownership is not the problem at hand, it's gun violence that is the problem at hand.
And just a quick follow-up,
Mm-hmm.
Would you go so far as to support gun buyback programs?
Voluntary. Yeah, a voluntary gun buyback program, as well as, as well as some common sense measures like universal background checks. Universal background check has 90% support amongst the American electorate, including 84% support amongst NRA members. Why that is not a law at this point is another example of how dysfunctional Congress has been and how dismissive of American public opinion they've become.
As a Marine Corps veteran, I raise my right hand to support and defend the Constitution, and the Second Amendment is part of being American. And so I'm going to have to protect that. However, I am more than willing to sit down at the table with Republicans and say, let's figure this out. And 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 let's common sense gun reform. And we hear that so much. What I say is we add a psychological background check to be able to own weapons that, semi-automatic, fully automatic weapons. Now, personally, I don't see the reason why a civilian needs that. But then again, too, it's the right to bear arms. I was trained specifically with the M16A2 service rifle. So I know the ins and outs of that. So I know what kind of damage it does. I know what it can do to somebody. We need to close the loopholes for the gun shows to allow anybody to have those. We need to make sure that we are not giving weapons to people who intend to do harm. That way we stop things such as the Las Vegas shooting. Because if we had a psychological background check in there, that could have been flagged. And currently right now with the VA, for example, certain conditions, a certain percentage of disability, that takes away people's guns. Why can't we have that with civilians? Why is it we hold veterans accountable, hold their feet to the fire, based on a psychological disability, yet we don't do that with the general population? That's something we need to do to keep everybody safe, because as a father of two, it does scare me to send my kids to school sometimes. And my kids' school is great. It's safe. They have police roving the area. But it's still the unknown. We need to keep our children safe at schools. We need to keep the American people safe on the streets. And I would support a voluntary buyback as well.
Okay. Tell us about your platforms on climate change, what you would do, specifics if you can. We'll start with you.
So from 90 to 100%, 99.99% of climate scientists are saying that we have global warming, and with the average out to 97%. And I am not an expert at global warming or climate, but I will listen to the experts who say this is what's going on, not the ones that are being bought and sold by big corporations. Now, what I propose we do to reduce our carbon footprint is we need to have a 35% tax on the carbon emissions, and each year goes up 15%. That way we reduce the amount of carbon pushed out into the atmosphere. I say we give more tax breaks for people who buy the electric cars. The newer places such as Texas, where in Waco we have a lot of sun. We have it mandatory that they have solar panels on their roofs. And places like Washington State have it mandatory they have some sort of wind power with new houses. And give credit for the older houses, give tax credits for the older houses when they put that on there, more so than what we have now. That way we can start reducing what we're doing to to our atmosphere, to our world, because we only have one.
So I have the advantage of being 57 years old, and I was paying attention back in 1987 when climate scientists first raised the alarm, and they predicted exactly what is happening now. So I think there's no denying the science. The empirical evidence is supporting the science that was predicted 30 years ago. And it's time to take action. Actually, it's well time to stop bickering about it. It's well past time to take action. I would support a carbon dividend and tax scheme to incentivize both individuals and corporations to reduce their carbon footprint, as well as incentivize industries such as the auto industry to provide lower carbon emission vehicles. I would support significantly increases in investment in renewable energies. If you travel through West Texas, the skyline is dotted with wind turbines as far as the eye can see, but you don't see them here in Central Texas, and one of the reasons for that is we're in a different wind zone. The average wind speed isn't quite enough to support the economics of deploying turbines here, so we need increases in efficiency in our turbines to be able to harness the wind that we have here in Central Texas. And the same applies to solar. We aren't in the Arizona desert here. We're a little bit closer to the Gulf. We've got a little bit more humidity, and efficiencies in solar power generation aren't quite there to support utility scale solar generation here in Central Texas. Improvements in technologies will make those technologies possible to be deployed here in Central Texas, hopefully within the next decade or so. The final thing we have to look at, the cleanest energy that we've got, and probably the most controversial energy that we have right now, is nuclear. We are getting to the point with advancement in climate change that we do have to be open-minded, and we have to look at nuclear as a possible bridging technology until renewables can satisfy 100% of our needs.
Any questions?
I've been asking everybody about impeachment. If you'd been in the House this past fall, you would have cast a historic vote. Would you have voted for the two articles that the House eventually passed, or would you have liked to have seen something else happen there? So I think we're starting with you, Mr. Good.
So, given the evidence that I saw, I would have voted to impeach a Democratic president, a Libertarian president, a Green Party president, an Independent president, or a Republican president, given the evidence that I saw. Could Congress have proceeded a bit more, could the House have proceeded a bit more slowly, called more witnesses, called more key witnesses, subpoenaed key witnesses like Mr. Bolton? Probably. In hindsight, that probably would have been the right thing to do. But regardless, again, given the evidence that I saw, I would have voted to impeach. I think the second article, obstruction of Congress, is actually the more dangerous article. The executive branch's obstruction of the investigation is just another indication of how far executive power has grown in the last 2 decades and how unable or unwilling Congress has been to check that power. I think it is critically important at this juncture in our political moment for the legislative branch to reestablish itself as a functioning, co-equal branch of government, to provide the proper checks and balances on the executive branch, and to restore our government to functioning the way the Founding Fathers envisioned it.
I would, based off, again, as Mr. Kennedy said, I would have voted for impeachment as well. Now, there was witnesses called. There were plenty of witnesses called, and they were told, they were ordered to defy the subpoenas. And so the option was left on the table to take it to the courts, and that would have taken up to a year to get decided, and that's before appeals. So there was witnesses called. Now, with them being ordered, that's obstruction. Ordered not to go to testify, that's obstruction. And so everything that was on the table, including the evidence and the obstruction, absolutely. And that would have been, as Mr. Kennedy said, any president, any party. Because we have separate but equal branches of government. We're there to put in, Congress is there to put in place the executive office when necessary. And that's how it should be. We have those checks and balances for a reason. That way we don't become an oligarchy like Russia. So yes, I would have voted for impeachment.
Let's go to a different vote. So we're about to vote in our primaries next month. So who are you voting for president?
So I get asked this a lot. Every one of them has some great things. Every one of them has some flaws. And it's actually, me and my wife will actually go through the positives and the negatives every night. Believe it or not, she has gotten really involved with politics. It's great. And she's got her favorites. I got my favorites. But I see everybody bringing something not good to the table. So at this moment, I honestly don't have a decision. I think it's going to be, we had Yang drop out last night. So I mean, I could have put everything on him, and then all of a sudden he's gone. So it's one of those things where I'm going to see it play out until almost the end, and then I will make my full-on decision.
Yeah, we do have a couple of weeks before we need to make that final decision and tick the box. I have not made a final decision also. I'm watching the candidates very closely. I will tell you that as a moderate centrist Democrat, my candidate will come out of that lane of the party.
Do you think that's for your own electability in the fall in this district? Do you think that's a critical piece that you have a more moderate candidate than Sanders or something?
I won't argue that a more moderate candidate would be more beneficial for my candidacy in the fall, but my decision is based entirely on my personal philosophy of government and what I think are effective and achievable next steps to move us forward on all these issues that we've faced. I hesitate. I really think we need to bring this country back together rather than further polarize it.
Do you care to address that? Like in the district, do you seek to represent which candidate at the top of the ticket or type of candidate at the top of the ticket would help or harm a Democrat?
So one of the biggest things I've seen, and it's not necessarily going to be the nominee. From what I've seen in our district, we're actually standing united. So if you can monitor Facebook, Twitter, go talk to somebody who's a Democrat, and they'll tell you, I'll support the nominee, whoever it is, and I'll get my friends and family to vote because we need to be united. So that's the best part about this, is seeing everybody coming together, seeing the Democrats coming together. Now, right now, everybody's got their favorites. You got the Bernie supporters, Biden supporters, things like that, and they kind of go at it every now and then. I mean, it's going to happen. However, when the push comes to shove, we're going to stand united. We are.
So sort of same thing. I'll shut up if somebody else wants to ask. Same thing, but in this district, which was drawn for Republicans, like so many, how are you seeing Trump supporters willing to consider, say, a Democratic president and a Democratic member of Congress, and how would you woo those types of voters who voted for Trump last time?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So when you have the die-hard, solid maroon red Republicans, it's going to be very hard to sway them. I mean, it's going to take a lot to sway them. However, very moderates can go either way. And one of the biggest things that I love about Central Texas is veterans, service members, family members. We have them everywhere. So when it comes to specifically, the congressional race, what I'm bringing to the table with my insight of the VA, that's going to help. It's me coming to them saying, this is what I've seen. This is the reason why one of the reasons why I'm running. This is what I want to do for you. That's going to persuade people. Because I can walk into any American Legion, VFW, and talk to them. Because we have that respect. We might not agree on everything. We might not. However, we have that respect, the courtesy of being veterans, and me coming to somebody and saying, listen, this is what I want to do for you. This is what I want to do for VA, and that's going to persuade voters. Now, to be, believe it or not, a lot of my first, part of the foreign donors, when the first part of my campaign, were Republicans who were veterans, saying, I like what you're saying. This is what I want. This is what we need. So I've seen it firsthand. I'm continuing to say it. Presidential is going to take a different candidate to bring people over. Now, people might come with their healthcare plan. We might have, some lower income individuals that say, you know what, I'm hurting right now because of my doctor's bills. I'm paying, if without insurance, you go to the urgent care, you're paying $250, but without any tests. So they're going to see that. And so depending on the right candidate, they can pull Republican votes over. They can.
So the path to victory for a Democrat in this district does not lie through the Republican base, of course. It relies on energizing the Democratic base, as well as you say, the district's gerrymandered. So you've got to provide a reasonable alternative for independents, Republican-leaning independents, and a small slice of moderate Republicans as well. It requires positions on issues that are well thought out, well articulated, and show a pragmatic approach to solving problems that are based on evidence-based problem solving, not left-leaning ideology.
You referenced a moment ago the polarization, divisiveness.
Yeah.
If you were elected, what's an issue that you believe that you could go into Congress as a freshman and work across the aisle to get something done?
Just about any issue, actually. And as a freshman, of course, you know the limitations on a freshman in Congress and what you're actually going to be able to do. You're on the back bench. That's all there is to it. And you're serving in committees that you're assigned to, maybe not necessarily that you wanted to be on. But given that, here's a couple of good examples. We did a forum, and it was two-party forum out in Milliken a couple of weeks ago. And the Republican candidates were speaking about issues like immigration, like healthcare. And of course, we were all speaking about the same issues. And there is common ground, not only with Republican voters, but with the Republican candidates. So do I believe we should deport 10.5 million people who are living here undocumented? No. But do I believe that going forward, legal immigration should be more merit-based than it is now? Yes. So there's a common ground to start from. Do I believe that the federal government should get out of the healthcare system entirely? No, I don't. But do I believe that there are aspects of the healthcare industry that would be amenable to opening up more market forces and allowing Americans more choice and more competition and bring prices down? Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the problems I see is both sides tend to start from their extreme positions rather than from their positions where we actually have common ground. And my priority would be to steer the conversation away from the divisiveness and towards the areas of where we start. Let's start from where we have common ground and then see how far we can push it to the right or to the left. But hold on to that common ground so that we've got something to come back to and get something done. There are no miracle cures out there for healthcare. There's no miracle cures for immigration. There are no miracle cures for climate change, for the infrastructure problems that we face. But we have to get back to at least moving the needle. And the only way we move the needle on any of this is by working from our common ground.
Some questions?
So one of the biggest things that Republicans and Democrats across board, well, not across board, excuse me, but for the most part can agree with is term limits. And we actually hear that a lot from the other side. You know, speaking to the Republicans running, they want term limits. Most of them want term limits. A couple of them don't. And so that's one thing we can address together. You know, we have that foundation. You know, we're not gang members. We're politicians. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it's too much different, but I mean, we can work together. And so it's finding the common ground to come together, sit down at a table like we're doing right now with each other, saying, let's figure this out. Let's go and do this. Order lunch, sit down all day. If it has to go in the night, let's do that next day. That's what it boils down to, is sitting down with people and talking, figuring out what we can do. I like your idea. Here's my idea. Let's combine that in some way, shape, or form. Take out the negatives and put in the positives. Such then also too, you know, again, I go back to VA because that is something Democrats and Republicans support. It's helping veterans. And there are too many members in Congress right now on both sides not to fix it. Immigration. We all have our ideas on how to keep America safe and productive and a flourishing economy, with a flourishing economy. But the thing is, it does come to immigrants. And the other side knows that. We know that. So we can sit down at the table. We can sit down with our counterparts and say, let's figure this out. So, and that's what it's going to take, is sitting down with somebody, swallowing your pride, and working on it.
It's about the redistricting, gerrymandering. You mentioned a citizens panel. I'm going to assume, just for the sake of this question, that we don't have a citizens panel next year.
It's a safe assumption, actually.
So you're in Congress, and we know that members of Congress have a say in what their districts look like and are dealing with the state legislature and
Mhm.
drawing those lines. So, for the sake of a less gerrymandered district, would you basically draw a line that hurts yourself? So if, in the case of Mark, if it became part of Roger Williams' district or something like that, and no longer had the solid Democratic parts of the district, in your district, you okay with that?
One of the biggest things is we need to let the people decide the elections, not politicians. And so if that takes me out of the equation, then I'd be happy to do it. Because honestly, it shouldn't be, politicians. We see, over here in this area, it's starting to become bluer and bluer and bluer. Let's take it out. It shouldn't be that way. It honestly shouldn't. So if it comes down to where I'm taken out of the district, then I hope I pushed hard enough and I've served honorably enough where I can run for that district I'm in and say, here, this is what I put on the table. This is what I have. And so yes, I would support that, as long as if it comes down to the people, not politicians.
If I'm going to talk the talk, I better walk the walk, right? Agree totally that, I'm going to, first of all, the state legislature, it looks like it might be balanced, fairly close, but, the Democrats probably won't take the Senate, but we might take the House, or at least bring it close and maybe have a greater voice at the table for redistricting. The technology and the data science that is available right now terrifies me. I knock on doors, even today I knock on doors where the neighbor over the back fence is in a different district. I had a constituent come and talk to me the other day. They say that they go walk their dog in their neighborhood and they traverse 3 congressional districts when they walk their dog in the neighborhood. That is entirely wrong, and given the advances in technology over the last 10 years, I swear they're going to be cutting houses in half if it's a split household. That's unacceptable. I believe it's deeply undemocratic. And if I wind up in a district that leans even more to the right than the 17th, I'm going to campaign the same way I won the 17th, which is focusing on kitchen table issues that affect people's lives and how we can improve their quality of life. And if it wins this time, it'll win next time too.
I wonder if you ran before.
Yeah.
Is there something you learned from your last campaign?
Oh, there's a lot of things I learned.
Share what is going to tip you over to the columns?
Most of it's intellectual property, so I'm not going to give it away in a public forum.
Okay.
I'll give you the one that I always give everybody, though, and that lesson is no more wishful thinking. Okay? There is no blue wave high enough. The blue wave breaks on the coast. It doesn't break in central Texas. What it takes to win in this district is a message that appeals, again, to those segments of the electorate that we have to get to cross over and vote for us. And it takes a focus on those kitchen table issues that affect the people in this district. Crowd out all the noise, focus on the folks in the district, get a message about how we can improve their quality of life, and then it takes boots on the ground, voices on the phone, fingers on the texting pads, worn out shoes, worn out tires. I found out how worn out my tires are in the rain this morning. I'm going right to the tire shop, I think, after this. And it's going to take, again, no more wishful thinking. It's hard work. Bill Clinton said, campaign until the last dog dies. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that phrase, but it sounds like you're working hard until the results are in on election night, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Is there something that we haven't asked that you wanted to touch on, both of you?
Well, I really just want to thank you for inviting us here. It's very important for us to get everywhere we can, and like he said earlier, we were in Bryan College Station yesterday, and here we are this morning. And it's great, and I know I love doing it. I'm pretty sure Mr. Kennedy does as well.
Would have been doing it for 2.5 years if I did, that's for sure.
And it's great that we're able to do that. And I want everybody to understand we are standing united. We are united. We back each other. We might be opponents, but we still back each other.
Yeah, ditto. I'd like to thank you for inviting us. Another big difference from 2 years ago is the fact that we're sitting in this room, which we didn't do 2 years ago. We have had televised forums on KBTX and KAMU. We didn't get that 2 years ago. Obviously, with Mr. Flores' retirement, the interest in the race has ticked up by orders of magnitude. And it's gratifying and it's satisfying. And, when I kicked off 2.5 years ago, I had a consultant look at me and he says, "Do you think you're going to win in 2018 or are you laying the groundwork for 2020? And I said, "I'm going to win in 2018. And he looked at me and said, "You're laying the groundwork for 2020. And here we are. And we built what we've built over the last 2.5 years, and we're well positioned to be able to make a legitimate run at this seat this time around.